Many of you do know David de la Pena. He's currently teaching the sophomore studio, one section. And David's been a lecturer in LDA for a couple of years now. Has taught, obviously, at the lower division studios. He's also taught in urban design studio and graphics, I think, was last quarter. David has also taught in Sac State's Department of Design. So he has a really good sort of practitioner experience that he brings to our program. We're really grateful for that. So David is a licensed architect and practicing urban designer. He works for a firm in Sacramento called Mogavero and Notestein. And they're kind of a multidisciplinary firm, but focusing on everything urban design, architecture, affordable housing. And he might tell us a little bit more about the firm when he gives us his presentation. He's worked both here in California and as well as Texas, where he pursued and completed a master's degree in architecture. He also has a couple of degrees from California. One is in Cal State Fulton. His first degree was in German. And most recently obtained a master's of urban design at UC Berkeley. Much of his work focuses on sustainable design and context-sensitive community design, which he'll be talking about as well. So please join me in welcoming David de la Pena.
Thanks, Michael.
Your volume on?
Or do I have to turn it on? How do I do that? Hello? Okay. If any of you don't recognize the slide up here, I feel like that person right now. I'm rigged up with microphones, and I actually just got back. Came directly here from the airport after having spent 2 or 3 days down in Southern California doing workshops in the city of Camarillo. And when Michael asked me to give the talk, I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to present, but knowing the topic was design as activism, I entitled it "The Pusher: Selling Vision to Communities." And I hope that provoked a little bit of ambivalence in you, because it does in me when I think about the job that I do and that I've seen being done in the name of participatory design or community design. Sometimes it feels like you're a traveling salesman out on the road trying to sell something to a community that might not necessarily want it. And so that's the title of the talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think about community design or participatory design, and I'm going to show you a bunch of projects that I've worked on, and the ways that I feel that a designer can play a role in actually helping the community come to a vision of its own. Let's see. First, a little background on my interests. I've been sort of obsessed with the relationship between individuals and communities. And I was interested in this in architecture school and in my practice as well. And one thing that I realized about architecture is that it's very sort of individualistic in its orientation a lot of the time. The focus can be on individual objects. They're buildings, but they're objects in the same way that an individual is one member of a community. So a building is one member of a city. And so as I've practiced architecture, I've tried to, in my practice, to see beyond the parcel lines, beyond the lot lines. And that's something that architects often struggle with. And it's one of the reasons that landscape architecture has appealed to me. Because, as my students have heard me say before, landscape architects are really uniquely situated in a position of being able to see not the objects in the landscape, but the patterns of the landscape and the systems that govern ecological systems, social systems, economic systems. So thinking about individuals and communities, you know, this country is a very sort of individually oriented one. And we tend to like to think about our freedom of choice, our free will, our independence. And something that's struck me is that independence or free will isn't completely free. That there are structures, there are systems that guide us and help direct us in one way or another, and those are, you know, really community systems. And now here's here's where it gets a little probably overly technical, but the foundation for the way that I practice is really sort of based in this idea or this theory. And this is a very well-known French theorist, sociologist, who just died a few years ago. And he's known for writing really completely inaccessible theory. That, you know, the longest sentences you could read that you cannot understand. And I had to read his book and in graduate school and give a report on it, and it was the worst 2 weeks of my graduate school life, except that I got something out of it. And what Bourdieus was trying to do, this is my interpretation of it, or at least how it works for me, is he's trying to solve this problem, this sort of difference between the individual and the community. And he doesn't phrase it exactly that way, but in sociology there are sort of two poles, and one is sort of the agency side, and the other one is the structuralist side. So the agency side says there's free will, everybody does as they choose, everybody's experience in life is completely different, you don't step into the same river twice. And then the structuralist side is sort of, there's, you know, predetermination. You are, and this sort of follows theories of Marx and other socialists, that there are structures out there that really govern how people behave in groups, and that really your choices are very, very limited. Now, Bourdieu tried to reconcile these two, and one of the ways he did this was through a concept he called habitus, or habitus, where he says, yes, there is free will, people make decisions, but they're based on a whole bunch of factors that are really structural. So where you grew up, what your parents listened to, what they told you, what schools you went to, your race, your gender, your class. And that those really are the structures that inform the decisions that you make. Now, that doesn't seem like it necessarily relates to design, but to me it does. As far as practicing, and what I do is, well, let's see, lots of different things, but in terms of going out and trying to come up with plans that work for communities, to improve communities, the process involves a lot of public participation. And there's one, you're probably all familiar with the word public participation, not just from this class, but, you know, out there in the public. When you see projects come forward in cities, there are workshops, there are study sessions, and public participation has sort of become a requirement. And because of that, one of the problems is that the process isn't always necessarily used to help bring out what the community wants. It's used as a way for a developer or some special interest to convince the public that they're right and to get them to buy in on it. So what Bourdieu's theories mean for me is sort of this sort of 5-step process here. One of what Bourdieu was doing really with his idea of habitus was saying there are structures out there, and individuals can break free of those structures, or they can restructure society. But the first thing they have to do is be aware of the structures. And since I have a degree in German, there's a German playwright named Bertolt Brecht who did this in his plays, where he would make sure that the audience always knew that it was a play. So halfway through the play, he would do something that said, you know, wake up, look around you, you're in a play. So be conscious of what you're doing. Be conscious of your surroundings. And Bourdieus does something similar with habitus and says, you need to be aware of all of the things that influence your behavior. And so as a designer, when I'm in front of a group or trying to lead a design charrette, it's really important that I'm upfront about my own biases. I have biases. They aren't necessarily in line with the community's. And a lot of people go in thinking that they can get around that somehow. And that's to me, that's not ultimately fruitful. Let's see. So be upfront about your own influences and biases. Understand the community and all of its structures and biases. So by structures, again, I mean sort of social structures, hierarchies. You know, there's a certain city council member that controls a certain pot of money. You know, you need to understand all of these influences, and they don't seem like design influences, but if you don't pay attention to them, they can completely derail all of your good intentions. Third step, ask how these structures either limit the community's decisions and how they align with community values. Sometimes there are systems out there in place that aren't necessarily what the community wants. They're there. For example, a neighborhood that has no bicycle lanes, right? That's a structural problem. There are no bicycle lanes. If you polled everybody in their house and asked them whether they bike or not, you know, more people in a town without bicycle lanes will not get on their bicycle. So they are limited by a structure that doesn't accommodate their value systems necessarily. And then fourth, design changes to the structures if necessary. And fifth, use your skills. So as designers, we have certain skills in envisioning things that aren't there, and in presenting tools, techniques that can make that happen. Okay, so I'm going to show you 5 or 6 projects that I've been involved in over the years that fall under the heading of design activism in some way. And this one might seem like something that you could do for this class. And it's something that I did in my architecture graduate school back in 1996. We built a house. We designed and built a house for Habitat in Austin. And this is a certain kind of sort of academic engagement that I think can be really useful. And I think there was a good product that came out of this. But I'm also a little bit sad about this project because I feel like as a student I didn't really understand what I was doing. I was using activism to promote my design, and I wasn't using design to promote a different activist agenda. You understand what I'm saying? So here's what I'm saying. On the right here is Beatrice, and this was her house. And she had a family with 2 young daughters, and she came into our studio, and we competed against each other in teams to try and come up with the coolest house to build for her. And as you can see here on the left, this was my team's proposal. We built the model out of basswood. It was precious. It was a beautiful object. It wasn't for her. We said it was for her, but it really was for us. It was for our portfolios. It was for It was for our agendas. And what we didn't do was recognize, our own biases, our own interests were at play in how we were designing this project. We weren't really doing it for her. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because it makes me a little sad. The house was actually built. I don't think it's any better than a normal habitat house. But maybe we could have built 2 habitat houses in the time that we built our crazy one. So some of you know this project. And another ambivalent project of mine that I got my hands into. This was the original proposal that Target presented back in 2003 or 2004. And it's being built right now. And I was practicing architecture at the time, and a friend of mine, Z. Smith, and I saw the plan and were just horrified at the amount of pavement on this site. Actually, the slide you see here shows shows actually color on it. The original one didn't have any color, and when they realized that people like me were going to get upset about it, about the amount of paving, they put some green on it, and they painted the buildings yellow to make it friendlier. This project, I think, for me, represents a type of activism that you all can be involved in, and that this was my first taste of being involved in, and it's sort of a civic engagement, sort of civic activism. Again, you have skills, and if you bring them to the table, you have power to influence people and to make people change their minds about certain courses of action. In this case, this was the Target proposal. It really looked like the City Council and the Business and Economic, Business and Economic Development Commission were going to probably approve this. And there weren't designers on those commissions. And so my friend and I did this little exercise to demonstrate to them how it could be different. The ways that these types of projects get replicated over and over again is that people can't imagine the alternatives. And so as designers, you have this ability to bring forward alternatives, visions that the community can appreciate. I'm just going to go through this really quick. Looking back at it, it's not, our proposals weren't great proposals, but what they did do was they presented something clear that people could relate to and understand. So we took the original site plan, there it is, right here, which had a lot of parking, and they said, well, maybe there would be a future bridge across the creek, but then it just had these 3 little pads for retail restaurants. And what we did was we superimposed the Davis Commons onto the site plan to show them they were missing an opportunity with the size of this site. The Davis Commons where the Bourdieus is. And not to say they should do this there, because they shouldn't, but to say here's what you can do with all of this land. It doesn't all need to be parking lots. You can group these buildings together. And my friend Z and I printed these out, and we went down to the Bedsea Commission meeting and sort of stormed in and made them listen to us. And they have to listen to you, because you're a citizen. They have to give you your time. And the funny thing happened, they listened to us, and not only did they listen to us, they said to the Target representative, John Dews, I still remember him, they said, forget your plan, do this one. So they made a motion. They said, we want this plan alternate number 2. And they sent Target back to the drawing board. And that was a real eye-opener to me, just to see how 2 people could go into a meeting and change the course of something that seemed so big. And it was because we used these skills that we had to be able to, take something that we've seen somewhere else and put it onto a plan. The other thing we did was we introduced the city to the LEED certification process, and we went to the city council meeting and said, okay, now you're going to allow this building with some slightly different configuration. You need to make it green. And the city council said, okay, we will require that Target get this building LEED certified. And so the building that's going up right now, they haven't screwed it up completely, will be LEED certified. They did kind of backtrack on the site plan, unfortunately. But again, being able to not just present a vision, but present something that can be implemented. So this list of sustainable measures was something that people could take from a designer and put it into reality. Okay, now these are projects that the following ones are projects that I've worked on professionally at Mogavera Notestein. Some of them are ongoing. This one is ongoing. And these are a little different. So this is sort of activism with a client, with an agency client. In this case, this is the town of Maple Park, or town of Live Oak, which is about an hour north of Sacramento. And it's that the client was the Sutter County Housing Authority. And they have this property here with 20 duplexes arranged in no apparent order on this site. Let's see. So what we did here was a really careful analysis of, looking carefully at basically the community that they had created and the impacts of all of the different systems on people's individual lives and how people were adapting to it. So what we have here is a really wide street, no trees, driveways here and there, parking areas. They had closed the street off completely to traffic because the neighbors didn't want public housing in their neighborhood. And the housing authority thought that would be a good place for a trash dumpster. But on the other hand, there were a lot of mature trees, really beautiful London plane trees and valley oaks. The buildings were in really poor shape. And the way that they were arranged, they had backyards, a lot of open space, but they had no porches. They had no doors even to the backyards. So this is a structural problem where the way that the neighborhood is structured wasn't giving people opportunities that they may have wanted to have a sense of community. There weren't common areas that were clearly common that were shared. There weren't private areas that were clearly places that you could claim as your own territory. There weren't places for people to express their own ideas, their own individuality. That could be as simple as a small stoop where people put plants or other decorations. Instead, it was people were still living here and adapting the space to their own needs, but it was very subpar. So this project, I think, accomplishes things by presenting a vision that's very clear and very logical and very simple. So here's the original site. The street is actually called Maple Park. It's not Maple Park Drive. It's not Maple Park Way. It's just Maple Park. And the irony, of course, is that there's no park. It's just a white. Actually, I guess the little street closure there that you can see in green is kind of a park, but it's not supposed to be one. So here's the step. Here's the way that we analyzed this and presented it to the housing authority. In a set of steps, measures that you should take, sort of a strategy and tactics to implement this. The first step: preserve the significant trees. Second, provide adequate, well-defined private backyards. Third, relocate the housing units along the site perimeter. And you can see how much space we're getting left over here as we go. Fourth, reconfigure the street network, reconnect the closed street. So we actually did a one-way loop here. what number am I on, 5? 4 or 5, provide a public open space in the middle. So we reintroduced the park to Maple Park. And this is the site plan, which is a result of that way of thinking. And right now, the Housing Authority they've agreed on this plan. They're making some changes. They actually want it denser now. One of the problems was they wanted us just to replace it with just as many units. They said 20 units, or yeah, we have 30. We still want 30. And this plan had 40. And the community was so excited about this, they thought the Housing Authority is now thinking, well, maybe we could do 50 or 60, because they're giving such a benefit back to the community. Okay. Anybody know where Wasco is? It's a tiny town, Mark does. Northwest of Bakersfield. It's the rose capital of the world. Something like 50% of all of the roses in the country are grown in and around Wasco. And it's a typical Central Valley town. Has an old Main Street, a little bit of sprawl, but mostly pretty compact still. It's an old has a rail line that goes through it, and in fact, the Amtrak stops right there. So what you see here in the picture is the Main Street section. So we were hired. Here's another relationship to Activism, which is for a client, for an agency. So the planning department and the redevelopment agency hired us to come down and do a downtown improvement plan. So we spent a few days down there. And I'm not going to get into all the details of this project, but there was one thing that jumped out, one thing that stood out for us, it was really clear, was that there was a huge disconnect between what the planning department was trying to do and what the residents wanted. On the left side here, you see the residents that came to the public workshop. It wasn't a huge turnout. Usually you like to see it really, really full, but these were a lot of the community leaders that came out, and it was really productive. On the right-hand side, up on top, on the dais, was the city staff. And right there, we already saw that there was a problem. The city staff did not know how to relate to the community. They didn't, first of all, speak the language, and second of all, understand the culture. And Wasco's in a complicated place culturally right now. It's gone from being about half white to being 90% Latino. And so it has a large migrant farming population. And something happened at this meeting. Here, I'll show you this. The city manager was really proud of this clock tower. And they showed us a clock tower. We walked around the downtown. And we thought, fine, it's a nice clock tower. They said, yeah, it's actually on the brochures of the manufacturer now. It's like on their front cover. They like it so much. And we went to the meeting thinking everything was fine with the clock tower, and actually showed a picture of it and thought that people would, we were doing a ranking system by showing a bunch of pictures, and everybody ranked. I like this one, I don't like that one, to get a sort of gauge where the community was with the aesthetics. And the clock was like a -4 out of a -5 possible. It was the worst ranking of any of the slides, and we just could not understand it. And this guy here with the red hat stood up. He had been quiet the whole night. He stood up and he just started yelling. And this is why he was yelling. And he actually was yelling in Spanish, so it took us a while to completely understand what he was saying. And he turned out to be one of the leaders of the local farm workers union. So he had quite a lot of clout. And what he was saying was, where the clock used to be, there was a gazebo. And the city planners, sort of on their own, thought that the gazebo was a problem because people were congregating in the gazebo. And you can see it's not really the ideal location for a gazebo. It's in a traffic circle. Sorry, that's the only photo I can find of this gazebo because it's gone now. But this was the center of the community. This was the center of the community that would congregate here after hours. And without understanding the cultural background of the residents, it wasn't clear how meaningful this was to the planners. They saw it as blight or something that was a nuisance or something distracting from their downtown. So through the process, we got beyond the arguing, and we sort of realized they weren't going to put the gazebo back. But we did make a proposal to them that in the park that they had just started right here in the downtown, first of all, that they should have a rose garden, for goodness sakes, because it's the rose capital of the world. But they should have a gazebo. And this was a plan that we just put together as a way to try to get people to see the potential. But we also told them, this is, don't go do this. Go have more public workshops and design this gazebo with the community. And so I hope that's what they're going to do. I'm going to breeze through this. This was a plan for the overall downtown. Okay. This project is in Sacramento, in Oak Park, which is sort of the historically disadvantaged neighborhood, sort of southeast of the downtown. It used to be on the streetcar, so it was one of the very first suburbs. It's always had a really diverse ethnic population, from Russian and Eastern European groups to mostly African-American groups in the 50s and 60s. And now is just one of the most diverse neighborhoods in Sacramento, which is one of the most diverse cities already in the country. And the neighborhood has lots of structural issues, which we found out about. Our task was to do a streetscape project for Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and to do some improvements, infrastructural improvements in the neighborhood. And it was a really big project. This was our team, an out-of-control team of a lot of different individuals, including, I think you met Paul Zajkowski. There's Paul in a nice fluorescent vest. Civil engineers, landscape architects, economists, pedestrian experts, and over here in the corner, Dan Burden. And if you haven't come across his name before, he's a great individual. He used to be a photographer for National Geographic, and now he's a design activist. Really, he's kind of nutty. He wears big neon fishing vests, and he goes out into the streets and takes with his cameras and takes pictures of things and presents to communities how to make their streets safer and their neighborhoods more friendly. And he will be here next week. March 6th. Maybe that's not. Yeah, that is next week. Giving a talk on the 5th Street project in Davis. And there, actually, one of the landscape architecture students is working on that project right now, trying to help the city figure out if there's a good way to get bicycle lanes on 5th Street. And so Dan will be there presenting his own opinion about it, which is, of course, yes, there should be bike lanes. But so that's an opportunity to see this guy in action. We wanted the team to be really broad because we knew there were a lot of problems in the neighborhood that required interdisciplinary thinking. In retrospect, maybe it was a little too broad, but I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the process here. We did a lot of walking tours. We met with agency staff. We met with the schools. we had workshops, lots of brainstorming sessions, and this happened really, the bulk of it over 1 week. Then we sat down at tables with maps, and people drew out what they saw as the potentials in the neighborhood and also some of the problems. They presented these things to each other. And then in the end, so here are some of their comments. You know, create a bicycle boulevard. This should be a mixed-use zone. And a lot of what they did was we just encouraged them to just write their comments down. Not being designers, I feel it's tempting sometimes to have communities go in with maps and tell them to draw your future neighborhood. And it's unfair, really. It seems like a good idea, but the skills that you have as a designer for designing are not the skills that they have, which is knowledge of their community. So somehow you need to get their knowledge out in the format that they can have the most strength, which sometimes is just narrative. So we interpreted all of this into an overall plan that, for one thing, improved the overall streetscape along the street. I think we're adding something like 300 street trees along this stretch, undergrounding utilities, coloring the bike lanes, adding bus shelters, etc. And then also we looked at a few target sites. This was a rendering that I did not do, but we had done, which is really a useful tool for creating for creating consensus in a community and for creating momentum for people to want to push towards something. If you can't see, again, if you can't see what it is that you're aiming for, it's hard to get there. So these sort of gave the community a target. And a few really interesting things came out of this project that are sort of special to me. And sometimes I've struggled with this idea because these haven't come out of the community directly. It's not like community members drew these things out and said, this is what we should do here. They came from myself and other designers. But they came after sitting around with people and understanding their community in a lot of depth. So one of these was a problem that was identified by the community, which is this really horrible intersection here where they had a traffic signal right here. It says Sacramento Boulevard. That's the old name for MLK Boulevard. I lost my pointer. Well, you can see there's an intersection there on the north. And there it is, with the traffic light. And then this is the entryway to the community center. And it was a driveway. And it was just located in a horrible spot. It created all kinds of traffic problems. And it really was not worthy of an entrance to the center of their community. And we saw that as an opportunity and proposed that they realign this road to the north. And what they gained out of that was a real civic plaza, and I can see that over here. Just by relocating the street slightly, it's safer. And we opened up this space here, which will become basically a new civic plaza. And they're envisioning farmers markets there, health fairs, that sort of thing. Here's a view of that corridor, or that intersection. This was another park, and this also came out of a problem that was identified, which was that this park is sort of buried in the middle of the neighborhood. It's really kind of small, and you can see it has this really weird configuration where this is a private house. It's actually surrounded on 3 sides by houses. There's very little surveillance of the neighborhood, and so there are a lot of issues with drugs and other activities that the neighbors didn't want to continue there. And so what you have here is a reconfiguration that we proposed. And this one's a little trickier for them to implement because it requires acquiring 3 houses. But in exchange for those 3 houses, they have the opportunity to build, 12 more. And so this is turned in the right direction. We've suggested putting a street around the park and and then adding houses all the way along the side. These lots, as they are now, are 300 feet deep, which is a big problem. That's way too deep. I mean, a normal house in Old North Davis is, I think, 100, 120 feet deep. So these are really, really long. They present problems for police and fire. So I'm not sure if this one's going to go that far, but I hope that they do something along those lines. So here's a sketch in search of a place. We noticed there were a lot of vacant lots scattered throughout the neighborhood and suggested that maybe they could be turned into community gardens. They didn't have to be big. We said, this could just be one house parcel. And we suggested they put it on a corner so that there's a sense of security. And the community really liked this idea. And the city has since identified a corner on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard right here. The city owns this property, and they're working right now with the Parks Department to put a community garden here. And with any luck, they'll bring the community in to help them design it. Or students to help them design it. If any of you want to be involved in something like this, let me know. One of the things I learned through this project, here's a graph showing the ethnic diversity of this community. One of the lessons was it's really hard in a community process to get representation from the entire community. This community has, I don't know, what is that, 15, 20% Asian population, and we had no Asians show up to our meetings. We thought we tried, but we didn't try in the right way. Later, we found other ways that we should have communicated with the Hmong neighborhood, for example, which was not through flyers in English and Spanish, but through radio, through Hmong radio. And it's really hard to, it was such a big project, it sort of got missed, but it really shouldn't have. And so setting up the process is really one of the most important things you can do. This was the group that showed up for the workshop. And then one last slide of a park on a currently vacant land. I'm gonna not show you this one because I've shown you a lot, and I'd like to leave you a chance to ask me any questions. Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Great projects. Some questions for David. Just so many you have to ask. Just think about which one you want to ask. Yeah.
What are they planning on doing then with the target site? That they're building LEED certified, but you said that they're kind of going towards the initial idea with the area around it?
They actually they did go back and they redid the site plan very much along the lines of this. Oh, well, you can see it here. Along the lines of the one on the right. That was their initial stab. And then halfway through the process, they sort of just worked with city staff and they put another pad. They took a little bit off of that and they put another pad down in the middle of the parking lot. What we were trying to get them to avoid doing was creating just a little satellite Applebee's or something that everyone would drive to from Target. The way that it was arranged was you wouldn't walk from one side of the parking lot to the other. It was so vast. So they did sneak they moved one, migrated one carefully down to the bottom. And it's an important question because, I didn't follow the process all the way through. But these kinds of projects require somebody to really be vigilant and to be there as an activist, not just, come in and then leave. but to have a presence that's ongoing. One way to do that is to actually get on the committee, on the commission. I was on the planning commission for a little over a year in Davis, and it's a really useful way to contribute. There aren't enough designers on planning commissions and on city councils, and there are some students that do that too. And so,
with that project, the target site, you said you went into the city council and you gave them a proposal, and they were all for it as soon as you went in there. Well, what would happen if they weren't for it? What would you recommend to us if we're having trouble selling that vision?
That's a good question. One of the things, it wasn't that they were all for it automatically. I mean, there was some arguing going on about, whether this was feasible or not. You have to come with a set of really clear, understandable steps that they need to take. And you have to you have to be political. You have to think, how can I put this in front of them in such a way that they cannot say no, that it would be embarrassing. In the city of Davis, it's easy to do, and when you're talking about the environment, because nobody wants to, on local television, to say that they don't want a green building. So you have to be really careful about how you present it.
I was just curious, if they require a certain level of certification or just certification?
Another good question. They required certification after Target committed to trying for silver. And I thought that they should require it. If they were going to claim that they were doing it, they should be held to that. But they didn't. So I think it's just vanilla certified.
I'll take the last question here.
Is this about Bourdieus?
No.
Okay, good.
I think you did a pretty good job of explaining pretty dense material. But it's good to see that when we think of things practical in nature, we think we're responding to a situation we're doing. But it's good to see that there are theories that can help guide our practice, and it's important to remember that. That's an equal part of your education are the ideas. Ideas are things that motivate people. Ideas create visions in order for us to implement into action through our practice. I like that addition of Bourdieus. My question had to do with participation. Is there ever too much participation?
Good question. Sometimes in Davis it feels like there's too much participation. And it's not because there's too much participation, it's because the type of participation isn't the right kind of participation. A lot of the times projects, like I said, are pretending that they're participatory, but really it's a sort of a parade. I fortunately was not involved in the design of this project, but I witnessed in Davis somebody coming forward with a charrette, and halfway through somebody said, "This isn't a charrette, this is a charade. You know what you want to do, and you're shoving it down our throats." And that project, that whole process completely backfired. Because people realize when they're just there to vouch for something else that's not their own idea. So I think that's when it can be a bad too much. On the other hand, I mean, there is a point where where a designer needs to take some time and process it. Not everybody, you can't process a project as a group of 100 people very easily. So somebody needs to process it and then bring it back for comments and retooling.
Great.
I don't know if that answers the question.
It did. Good answer. I thought it was a good answer. Well, let's thank David again for coming to the class today. Thank you.